Alright, so I recently played through the Bowser's Fury section of the Super Mario 3D World port to Nintendo Switch. And I'm going to kick things off talking about the gameplay, although I do have, a lot to say on stuff outside of the gameplay, but I'll save that for the end. But overall, I wasn't really sure what to expect here. Like, I kind of heard about the general direction they went with it, but I just didn't know what it was really gonna play as or flow like. And if I had to make a comparison, it kind of reminds me of Sonic Frontiers in a way, to where it is a big open world, but there are several, sections divided out throughout the entire map that are linear. However, Sonic Frontiers is, a lot bigger. There's a lot more to do in the open world. And the open world section here is almost centralized. Like, I can almost imagine this format working really well for Crash Bandicoot. Kind of get, Warp Room-esque vibes from it. Overall, though, I think this game does a better job of what I felt like Super Mario 3D Land and World were trying to do in sort of mixing 2D and 3D Mario. But the latter two wound up feeling more like a 2D Mario in 3D, where this doesn't deviate as much from, certain 3D elements, but then the general linearity of the main levels sort of just overall mesh a lot more nicely for that, 3D, 2D mix. Another thing I will say is some of the other, unique ideas they were trying here honestly felt a bit more unique and fresh than even Odyssey, honestly, because Odyssey at the end of the day was more bringing some Banjo-Kazooie elements into 3D Mario and adding, a Kirby-like ability to steal enemy attacks. Here are the two other things you have is first you've got Bowser Jr. as, a computer-controlled assistant who you can customize to be a little more active or inactive. I have him as inactive as possible in sort of, assisting you. And granted, it's not like super unique to gaming in general, but I can't really think of another 3D platformer that did something like this. Like, a lot of the times you're either, solo, or if you have multiple characters, you switch to them, or if you do have multiple characters on the screen at once, it's always, human controlled by everyone. And then you got the Fury cycles, which I didn't plan this. Kind of funny that a Fury section starts on my pre-recorded footage right when I get to talk about it, but I don't know if it's more of a level timer or a day-night cycle, but I think, it's nothing too crazy, but the idea of having, a day-night thing that isn't just cosmetic, like, you have those pillars crash down, that can be a hindrance or be a new path through the level. You got, more enemies. Enemies are a little more aggressive. You got, a lot of fire being thrown your way. This, though, did lead to my biggest issue with the gameplay of Super Bowser's Fury. I don't know why I added Super to it. And that's the Bowser's Block collectibles, which is, what I'm going for here in the background. And you need a Bowser Fury cycle in order to collect them, which could leave you in a position to where, you find, the blocks, and you probably want to get it taken care of right away. You don't want to get, too sidetracked and forget about it and then forget where to go back to actually get it when you do finally remember. But there's no way to toggle it on its own. So you're left kind of, waiting around, twiddling your thumbs, trying to kill time, which, you should never be doing in this type of game. Unless you have a Bowser amiibo. Now, luckily, I did have a very totally legitimate amiibo coin for Bowser that I got years ago with a Mario Kart set. So, I did have access to the workaround, but that's just really shitty, honestly, for, a core collectible for 100%. I mean, if I didn't have this, I probably wouldn't have even gone for 100%. I think, this is just completely unreasonable. And I can get maybe doing something if the Bowser blocks weren't part of the game. Like, I was even thinking before that maybe it would be nice to have more control, whether it be right at the get-go or maybe by, clearing an area or, clearing the main story before going for 100%. Because, even though it might sort of go against, the vision they were kind of going for here, I believe in giving the player, as much control as possible to do what they want. And I feel like, some people may prefer the easier daytime sections or the harder nighttime sections. So I feel like, they should have that control. And I can sort of accept if it's more of, preference and it doesn't, affect something so, central to the experience, locking something like that behind an amiibo. But that's, not what they did. A couple other minor complaints. First off, was it just me? So you start the game, you have a fourth of the map unlocked. Then you unlock the next section, that's another fourth of the map. So at that point, you're probably thinking, okay, there's 4 sections. Each has, I don't remember, it's 3 or 4 levels in each section. Well, after you clear level 2, you unlock the entire other half of the map that doesn't have any additional levels. So that was a little disappointing because I thought they were setting up for 4 areas, but then there wound up only being 3. Something else I didn't like, so you kind of have to run through each of the linear levels 3 times, which normally I don't like repeating myself, but they actually did a decent job here of making it fun. They, add a new objective, they redo what enemies are there and their placement. It feels, just about entirely new and still pretty fun at that point. My issue with that is, sometimes you just want to go and knock out, the other 2 runs of the level, but they don't open up until you leave the area, so you wind up, clearing the level, traveling back through the level, and the levels aren't long. This isn't, really that bad, but, you go back through the level to leave to the main hub area, then you go do another level, and then you just kind of wind up going back and forth, and it winds up just feeling a little, tedious and unnecessary. Once again, I think it would have been better whether, right at the get-go or maybe once, you clear the main area, if they allowed you to quick travel like you can after you clear the main story. I don't know, maybe it's my fault for being impatient and trying to go for as much or as close, I guess I should say, to 100% as I, could before clearing the main story, but I don't know. And then something that was weird too is another way you can kind of get around that is if you wind up killing Mario, but then you have to go through a load screen, which seemed oddly long. Like, I don't know if it was actually a technical thing or a punishment for dying, especially when you consider the quick travel when you unlock it is like instantaneously. I mean, what do I know? But just from, my, general base observation, just something isn't adding up there for me. And then in the last Fury Bowser fight, I realized that you can throw pillars at him, and that kind of ruined the last fight. Because now there is a section when he's low on health on the, true final fight where he, spawns all the pillars, but he jumps across the map. So now you need to grab a pillar, and then he'll, be whirling a bunch of fire back at you that, you would lose the pillar if you get hit, and you can't really deflect it if you didn't have the pillar. And to me, a section like that makes sense. What doesn't make sense is before that, when he'll spawn, 5 or so pillars, won't really move, which will, easily allow you to, throw a pillar. He's clearly within striking range. So then you'll, ground stomp him. then you grab another pillar, he'll get up, and then you just rinse and repeat, and it's just more easy than it should have been. And I don't know if it wasn't something I noticed until the final fight, or if it was something that existed before, but the way I hit it, it just felt so climactic. Bleh. But overall, all of those complaints, minus the Bowser Fury blocks, are pretty minor. The other major complaint I have with this game is honestly just overall the value. Like, this was about 6 hours long to 100%. Obviously, some people might just do the main story. So it's like a significant amount of content, yet not worth the price of a full game, and they locked it behind the re-release of Super Mario 3D World, so you had to pay a full game price in order to experience it. And this, it just really should have been available independently, or if I was to compromise, I can mildly see or accept them, having it as, an expansion to, 3D All-Stars, 3D World, and Odyssey. Since most people who probably wanted to play it probably already had one of those games, but to me it's just such a slap in the face because, I'm one of the people who actually had a Wii U and bought the original 3D World, and I didn't really want to buy it again. And, knowing how, good Nintendo is at prices, probably still goes for $60, rarely goes on sale. I think I did get it for $40 on sale, which still isn't worth it in my opinion. Like, $20 at most, $10 on sale, I think is fair, independently or as an expansion. And it's just a shame, and it was honestly a warning sign looking back, because this was, the same time that, they had the limited release of Super Mario 35 and 3D All-Stars and Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon NES. And they just wound up getting, worse from there with some of their anti-consumer practices. And another thing that, is kind of, weird for me is, I would really like to see a full game, sort of in this vein, or a sequel to Odyssey, but then we got Donkey Kong instead, which I've heard mixed things on. I'm sure I would like it, but it just sucks how long games take now that it's going to be, probably, unless they, ship it to another studio, who knows what they're actually planning, but, it could be another at least 5 years before, they go back to, one of these things I, really wanted to see more of, especially here when it's more of, just a little taste of it, of what could be. And overall, though, I just don't think I can recommend this game unless, really like Mario 3D platformers. It just isn't worth the price for me unless, you were able to rent it. I don't know if it's part of the Switch Expansion Pass Premium subscription. I mean, maybe if you can get that and, play some other games you might want to play that are part of that, that would probably be worth it. But, independently, unless it ever, goes, super cheap physically. And it's just such a shame, too, when, once again, excluding the Bowser Fury blocks, it's all not gameplay related things that sort of hold this back from being, just a really fun little experimental game.